That legislation will end denials of insurance coverage for pre-existing illnesses. It will stop the cancellation of policies because someone has gotten very sick. It makes a number of reforms in this area. It's going to be phased in over the next 3 years. Some of the protections are already in place. I believe it's not only important in its own right, but it has beneficial economic consequences, because with these kinds of programs, small businesses in particular aren't forced to choose between leaving their people uninsured and doing something that essentially crushes their ability to stay in business. I'm also a big supporter of the stimulus package we passed a year and a half ago. It was an $850 billion bill. There is no doubt it added significantly to the deficit, but again, and I'm not taking my party's rhetoric here, I'm talking about what independent analysts have said. As much as we are unhappy with the present state of the recovery, there are probably between 2.5 and 2.8 million jobs more in this economy today because of that stimulus program. That 405 freeway we talked about, we had a whole matching program between federal and state share. We got this federal money, we made it conditional on the state moving up the program. They did it. The state match was gone because of the economic condition in California. And that stimulus money became the money that Caltrans used to meet the state match. So ironically, the federal government is on both sides of the funding component that's allowing the 405 to work. And there are, in addition to what we hope will be the long-term transportation benefits, there are economic jobs connected with that and many of these other projects. We're getting investments in new businesses, in green technologies, in research, and addressing some of the critical national diseases. And another feature of our legislative accomplishments this year I'm particularly proud of is a substantial increase in Pell Grants, in reforming the school loans, the educational loan programs for direct lending, which can allow so many poor people to get access to those loans, deal with the tremendous spiraling of tuition costs. It's just stunning, the change in 10 years in tuition costs. I am a guy who went to UCLA at $65 a semester, but that was a long time ago. The Wall Street re-regulation and consumer protection legislation is very important to avoid the problems that got us into the situation we found ourselves in 2008. We made a terrible mistake, Democrats and Republicans, federal executive, in the rapid deregulation of the year 2000. We've tried to rectify that with what we've passed just last month, that the President signed into law. We're ending too big to fail. We are providing a mechanism for the banks to fund to stop taxpayer bailouts of future bank recoveries, and we are watching and insisting on reserve requirements and lending practices that maximize the likelihood of repayment, not the kind of we don't even check your documents loans that were being granted, particularly in the housing market, all through the last 10 and 15 years. We passed a credit card holder bill of rights to try and deal with the egregious kinds of fees that were being charged for people who were one day late on the payment or who inadvertently exceeded the maximum on their credit card. I could take another half an hour to talk about the different bills we've passed that I think in the long term will help this country. But I do want to mention my biggest disappointment, which was our failure in the Senate, the House passed it, to legislate a price on carbon, a very important part of trying to rebalance our energy and environmental situation. So we have failed to deal with the problem, the emissions, carbon emissions that lead to climate change. And for those who want to debate the validity of climate change, this is not science, but you get enough anecdotes piled one after another, you can start reaching some conclusions. As you look around the world and the kinds of once in 100-year and once in 1,000-year episodes of torrential drains and droughts and flooding that is going on. we have to come to terms with the consequences of our long-term ambitions. But just as importantly, we have to deal with the reliance on foreign oil imports, particularly from the Middle East. It distorts our national security situation, it hurts our economy, and it's bad for our environment. So this is unfinished business, which I hope we can do when we get back, and if not, make it a priority next year. I heard a little something go off that made me think it's, was that an alarm clock, or that was just you having to go outside? No. But look at foreign policy issues. I spend a huge amount of my time, and I managed to get through what I think of as the strongest sanctions ever, dealing with Iran's nuclear program. This is something worth it. If there are questions in this area, I'm happy to get into it. I just think it's one of our critical national security challenges. The whole non-proliferation regime goes out the window if Iran acquires nuclear weapons. This is not just an issue about Israel. Yes, the Ayatollahs in Iran talk about exterminating Israel. They obviously have an implacable hatred for it, and Iran poses an existential threat to Israel. But do not think this is not a national security threat to the United States and the rest of the world. Iran with a nuclear weapon is an Iran that can pressure for production cuts in oil exports with the other members of the Middle East cartel and massively increase prices should they choose to do so. They become the big guy in the whole area, this area, until we move into a different form of energy, has tremendous impacts on our foreign policy and our safety. With a nuclear weapon capability, the ability to hand off nuclear materials to terrorists always exists. And you can talk about deterrence and containment, and while thank God that worked to avoid a great confrontation during the Cold War, when I listened to the speeches of the Supreme Leader and the President of Ahmadinejad, I don't assume that rational activity guarantees that if they had a nuclear weapon, they wouldn't use it. We can talk about Pakistan, where I spent a great deal of time and focus in terms of legislation. I know Lebanon is a concern to a number of people, and I'm happy to get into that. I'm obviously very interested in the Middle East peace process. I'm actually quite hopeful that in the next day or two, we will start the direct talks between the Israeli leadership and the Palestinian leadership. That is the Palestinian Authority leadership, not the leadership of the terrorist organization that controls the Gaza. The START Treaty, U.S.-Russia relationships, the role of China at the economic level, at the political level, and China is everywhere in the world, trying to secure energy sources, establish relationships, and use the incredible foreign reserves they've acquired from their trade relationship, most of all with the United States. There are many issues dealing with China. They clearly also have a growing military agenda. They're building up their military very fast. Richard mentioned the entertainment industry. I am on the Judiciary Committee. I also use my Foreign Affairs Committee because digital piracy is a terrible problem and counterfeiting is a terrible problem that is stealing from companies and creators in our community. In China, 85 to 90% of all the software used by individuals and by businesses is pirated. It is not paid for. This is software made in this country to a great extent. It is entertainment programming made in this country. 85 to 90% of it is stolen. In 2000, we let China into the World Trade Organization because they agreed to abide by legitimate rules. They passed good laws on the issue of counterfeiting and piracy, and then never enforced them. I have a variety of different